we'll be intellectually stimulated and challenged. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you, Thomas, for having me here, introducing me, and for your kind words. I don't know if I can live up to them, but and thanks to the audience. Thanks to everyone who is listening to me. So I gave this title to Anna and Thomas some, I think, months ago, Guyana's Exclusive Economic Zone, a Geopolitical Review. Spoiler alert, exclusive to Guyana. I think I will show you that it's no longer exclusive, it's owned by others. Economic zone, well, it's hugely profitable, not to us, the people of Guyana. So my presentation is in two parts. First, I'll deal with the challenges to Guyana's maritime sovereignty. I looked at land sovereignty last Tuesday. And then in the second half, some reflections on sovereignty, which are devoid of safeguards, empty of safeguards for public property. Last week, I looked at public property on land, and I look at public property in the maritime area today. So it will be a very quick gallop through events from 1833 to 2020. And I shall begin with looking at some definitions and jurisdictions. Guyana's jurisdiction, also the challenges from Venezuela and Suriname. So I say here that Guyana's EEZ, or Exclusive Economic Zone, the story of the EEZ is the story of petroleum. Petroleum was discovered in commercial quantities in Guyana, as we all know, in 2015. It's described as sweet, light, and low in sulfur, high quality oil located relatively close to ExxonMobil's refining centers in the USA, in the southern USA. It fascinates me that Venezuela's oil is considered unusually sour, as Cole describes it, not suitable for most refineries worldwide. It's extra heavy crude in the Orinoco Basin, so it needs more refining. So we have these contrasts. Of course, as I mentioned last week, and it's true of oil, in terms of quantity, Venezuela is Goliath with its 300 billion barrels of proven oil. Guyana has 8 billion barrels. We're David in terms of oil reserves. So a quick history about the EEZ, or the rules for maritime areas. Until 1945, what governed sovereignty overseas was called the cannon shot rule. So international customary law allowed countries which had a coastline to extend their sovereignty outwards for 3 nautical miles, basically as far as you could shoot with a cannon. And that gives nation states exclusive sovereignty in the airspace above their land and water territory. In 1945, the USA unilaterally issues sovereign rights to its offshore continental shelf. This is after the war, it's the American century, and that really launches a race. Many countries follow suit, many countries with coasts, and they're laying claim to ocean property anywhere between 12 and 200 miles. In that period, we all know Guyana was a British colony. So Britain in Guyana adopts a legislation in 1954 called the British Guyana Alteration of Boundaries Order. This extends our boundaries to include this contiguous continental shelf. How is it defined? I've used the definition of continental shelf from UNCLOS, the current United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which says it is a distance up to 200 nautical miles from the baselines. So Guyana, or British Guyana, had asserted its sovereignty to that continental shelf as far back as 1954. Because of that free-for-all, which followed President Truman's unilateral declaration, responsible governments began to work together to try and draw up rules to manage the international sovereign, these claims by states to coastal seas. And that led to the 1958 Convention on the Territorial Sea and the Contiguous Zone. For our story, what territorial sea means, it defined by UNCLOS as not exceeding 12 nautical miles. For our story, we can see that United Kingdom, Venezuela, and the Netherlands, the three players, which of course who are of matter to us now, all signed the Territorial Sea Convention. That convention was 1958. All three signed it and ratified it in 1960, 1961, and 1966, respectively. But here's the thing, Venezuela appends reservations, meaning it's not going to accept those parts. So its reservations were with regard to Article 12, this idea of equidistance, I'll come back to that, and Article 24, which limited the contiguous zone to 12 miles from the baseline. As you will recall from last week, Venezuela continues to insist that it has some sovereign right to the Essequibo region of Guyana without having ever established or put forward any substantive sort of evidence to underwrite that claim. So Venezuela has these reservations to the both the contiguous zone and to equidistance. Now, I don't have a photograph. I was trying to look for a map to show the equidistance rule. So I'm going to hold up the cover of Sridhat Ramphal's book, which shows the equidistance line between Guyana and Suriname. So basically it says that equidistance rule that if two states are next to each other, then neither can claim beyond the middle line. This, of course, this is contested. This was contested, still is contested by Venezuela to our west. To the east, it was finally settled through an accepting equidistance in 2007 by ITLOS, the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea, which I will come to. So EEZ, what is this? What does it mean? Here's a definition in Articles 55 and 57 of UNCLOS. Again, it deals with this area exclusive to a nation state from its shore to as far as 200 nautical miles from that shore baseline. So UNCLOS is the successor to the 1958 Convention on the Territorial Sea. Both Guyana and Suriname signed this agreement, this convention in '82. UNCLOS comes into force in 1994, 1 year after Guyana became the 60th nation to ratify the treaty. And you can see two things that Guyanese would look at. Guyanese would say, oh, okay, 1982, that's during the PNC that Guyana signs, but luckily, we're so happy that it's ratified during a PPP administration. It's something at least that the two huge race-dominated parties have agreed on. Suriname ratifies UNCLOS in 1998. By this year, there are 168 parties, and including the European Union, which have joined UNCLOS, but from our point of view, important for our story, does not include Venezuela or the USA. They have never signed UNCLOS. So quickly on to Venezuela's expansionism. So Judith Ewell, a wonderful American scholar who died a few years ago, has really looked at this Venezuela's tradition of expansionism, and she shows it goes back a long way. So for example, in 1833, Pombo and Michelena, the Treaty of Pombo Michelena, named after two secretaries of the foreign ministries of the Venezuela and Colombia, they sign a treaty to demarcate their western land border. That western land border, the Venezuelan Congress refuses to ratify it because they are expansionist. It's only settled 100 years later, or more than 100 years later, after Colombia gave up about 13,000 square kilometers of territory. By then, of course, in 1941, Venezuela had long found oil in Lake Maracaibo and beginning offshore. They were pursuing sole claim to the Gulf of Venezuela and to the exclusion of Colombia. So this expansionist, Venezuela's tradition of expansionism, it's not just about Guyana. So here's a map which shows Lake Maracaibo, Gulf of Venezuela, and Venezuela, the area it leveraged or got Colombia to agree on finally when that treaty was ratified. So now over to Suriname, and I'm trying to do this presentation in a bit of chronological order, as these the two sides are happening simultaneously, but I'm trying to keep them separate. So last week, I did look at the maritime boundary with Suriname. I mentioned that the United States was trying to settle the land boundary and also extending it north to the sea and to the maritime boundary as well. The Netherlands at that time, which was the mother country of Suriname, had confirmed this desire for equidistance, that there would be this North 28 East line to demarcate the maritime boundary. As I mentioned last week, the tri-junction point is fixed by the three commissioners from Britain, Dutch, Brazilian commissioners in southern Guyana. The Dutch are there. Dutch and British teams proceed northwards. They fix the land boundary at point 61, and they affix the concrete blocks. They buried them as permanent markers. The United Kingdom tries to settle the boundary, their draft treaty in 39. Another treaties are the changes a bit. Suriname becomes internally self-governing in 54, and from 54 in the 50s, this the positions of Dutch Guyana are changed. First, they maintain this idea of the equidistance line, but then there's the rejection of the new draft treaty in 62, which the Dutch present, but they say even in 62, we are going to honor this idea of equidistance to determine the border on the continental shelf. As I mentioned last week, by 1965, UK submits another draft treaty to the Netherlands. It's 1 year before Guyana's independence. This is rejected by the Netherlands. They reject the idea of the principle of equidistance. There's a unilateral claim to the New River Triangle. What's interesting to me as well is that at the same, Suriname becomes independent in 1975 on its eastern side, where it's dealing with the French, because French Guyana is an overseas département of France. They use the line of equidistance to settle their maritime border with French Guyana. So we've seen, as I mentioned last week, this pincer movement, that Guyana is weak. It's seen as internally divided into these in race riots and race-based parties. And so Venezuela on the west, Suriname on the east are rejecting final boundary settlements and laying claim to Guyana's territory on land and on sea as well. 1962 is an interesting date as well. It's the date in which the semi-submersible platform was invented by Royal Dutch Shell. This allows oil exploration to begin in waters which are too deep to support traditional platforms. And so this is now the launching or the era of deep water oil. Back to Venezuela. So last week I talked about the invasion of Ancoko and then this expansion of Venezuelan aggressions into the maritime boundary, into the maritime area. So in 68, 2 years after Guyana's independence, there is the presidential decree that asserts rights to the 12-mile territorial sea, including to Guyana's Essequibo territorial sea. And later in 2015, this is during the APNU plus AFC period, just after there's the presidential decree which seeks to create something ludicrously called the Atlantic coast of Venezuela, which includes the Essequibo. So it's a consistent assertion by Venezuela. Judith Ewell has this, some quotations from Prime Minister Burnham on the 12th of July, 1968, which are worth me drawing to your attention, where Guyana puts up a very stout defense of its territorial sea at the National Assembly. Prime Minister Burnham says, whatever positions individual countries may take in relation to the breadth of territorial seas, it is palpably clear that only one state may possess sovereignty over the territorial sea relating to the same coast. Burnham asserted that since Guyana's continental shelf extended 200 miles out, Guyana would not surrender to Venezuela any rights of exploitation of the shelf. And this concept of adjacency is also a key principle in the used by the International Court of the ICJ, International Court of Justice. So I talked about last week about the similarities in the playbook of Venezuela and Suriname. These are hardly coincidental. Probably there is some behind the scenes discussions to reject the boundary commissions, reject the principle of equidistance. Both of them do, issuing their unilateral national maps that include Guyana's territory, gunboat aggressions by both of them, and using the border card to wake up a kind of jingoism among their populations, even though there's no irredentist population within Guyana that wants to, that identifies with either nation state. In these years, 1980s to 90s, there's prospecting in the Rupununi region for oil. This is unsuccessful. But Guyana, we learned from Rampel's book, by May 2000, had already issued 11 concessions in the maritime area. In the, when the case, Guyana-Suriname case was being argued at ITLOS, the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea, Guyana claimed that there was drilling in these licensed areas. There was seismic testing, and that Suriname had some knowledge of some or all of those activities, of some of them, either directly or through Statsoli, the state oil company, and never objected. So May 2000, that's 1 month before the gunboat aggression by Suriname, Guyana said, no, Suriname knew what Guyana's concessions in its exclusive economic zone. So here I list some of the exploration license awarded by successive presidents of Guyana in this deep water area. You can see the names which are now in our newspapers over the last 3 years, almost every day. You can see ExxonMobil occurs twice, so that they have the Stabroek Tract and later the Kanji Tract. These are enormous areas offshore. Suriname's aggression begins, it's carried out on June 2000. It's an interregnum between one government and another government, where the Navy has new boats and 2 gunboats actually just simply hitch up the CGX oil rig, which is in Guyana's EEZ, and tow it away. The Guyana tries for 3 years to have a diplomatic solution to this aggression. That fails. In 2004, Guyana files this petition to the ITLOS. There's which because both countries had signed the UNCLOS treaty, it's allowed for compulsory arbitration. Both Guyana and Suriname had ratified UNCLOS, and that story we all know as well, or most of us on this call who are Guyanese, or all Guyanese will know. In October 2007, ITLOS rules in Guyana's favor. It's described, it confirms the validity of the equidistance rule, and I think as I showed you here, and not what Suriname wanted, which was a line which would go straight up so they would take more of the exclusive economic zone. And this is a first for UNCLOS. It's a first for, of course, at least it settles the sea border of Guyana, Guyana's maritime border. Last week I mentioned both our land border on the east and on the west remain unaccepted. The controversies continue. So what's happening in terms of this EEZ? these Suriname's aggression work in ExxonMobil's favor. ExxonMobil is a huge player in this maritime area. They were in Venezuela's area between 1922 and May 2007, when ExxonMobil walked away. I mean, they had a towering presence in Venezuela from 1922 to 2007. We probably all know the story as well. It's often in the newspaper. In 2006, Hugo Chavez tries to get he creates PDVSA in Venezuela. He wants all of the foreign oil companies to agree to joint ventures. ExxonMobil did not want that and walks away from its Venezuelan interests, from its Venezuelan businesses in 2007. That, according to Steve Cole, cost Exxon almost $12 billion in US dollars at that time. From our point of view, Guyana's point of view, when Exxon walked away in 2007 from Venezuela, it had in its pocket secretly the 1999 secret agreement it had signed with Janette, which I will come to. So Venezuela probably doesn't know that. No one knows that. The Guyanese don't know that until 2017. But Exxon has this, this huge thing in its favor. It has a contract which gives it wall to wall, from Venezuela to Suriname, control over this huge block. So what does Exxon do? It declares force majeure just after this aggression by Suriname, even though Suriname is far away, the aggression with the CGX rig is far away from where Exxon, its interests. And it declares the force majeure, and it has then, from 2001 to 2008, a period of time where it's doing in-house analysis of the 2D seismic and aeromagnetic surveys that it was holding. It suspends the relinquishment schedule, so it's not giving up 25% after so many years. It holds on to the whole area. In 2008, EEPGL, that is ESSO, Exploration and Petroleum and Guyana license, it lifts the force majeure. It restarts the seismic surveys with what is then newly available 3D interpretation. It negotiates a renewal of the PPL, of its petroleum prospection license, a new bridging deed, and legal documents. These are still secret. They're held by Sridhar Ramphal. They've never been released. So in 2012, Exxon, when it restarts its prospection drilling, it's aided by precision spatial 3D maps. Where's Guyana? Busy with race politics, beating killing women and beating the wives and killing each other on race. So Exxon restarts its surveys in 2012. Venezuela, by then, it's a shadow of its former self. This is a year before the death of Hugo Chavez. It objects to what Exxon is doing, but it's by then already in free fall. President Chavez dies in March of 2013. By September, you have the flexing of these various parliamentarians and the ministry. They've crossed illegally to Eteringbang, Mr. Juan Guaido included. A month later, I guess, I don't know if this has to do with domestic politics, Venezuelan Navy detains the Technic Perdana ship, holds it for 5 days. This is contracted by another company that holds a license, Anadarko. So Venezuela is now probably quite weakened. And so I'm going to now move to the second half of my talk, which is looking at issues of sovereignty and property. So really, this is about sovereignty means ultimate political control over one's territory. And I offer today, or my sense that it's something we have as Guyanese. We hold it, as a kind of concept that we're sovereign, 83,000 square miles, or EEZ. Really, we've given it away. So as I mentioned, 14th of June, 1999, President Janette grants this 10-year, 6 million hectare petroleum prospection license. It covers more than 11 times the legal limit according to Guyanese law. Guess what? It's granted on the same day as the company applies for it. I mean, that's how casually we hold our sovereignty. It's a secret award. There's a petroleum agreement, as I mentioned, which has never been released. This license, the license was not disclosed until it was published by the Independent Stabroek News in 2017. Let's look at what Guyana has, what Guyana's power is. In 2019, ExxonMobil's global proven reserves are 24 billion barrels. At that time, Guyana was thought to contribute 5 billion barrels of Exxon's proven reserves that it's holding in its licensed area. Now we know that Guyana's, the Stabroek Tract alone is 8 billion barrels. As I showed in an earlier slide, Exxon has property in other tracts in Guyana. So does Guyana leverage its power? We are 1/3 of Exxon's proven reserves. Nope. We are at the level of, you're not going to leave something for them by. Paul Harris captures the kind of ludicrous approach. Landlord, we're not the landlords. We are busy with race politics. Landlording is being done by the companies that hold these licenses that they have written for themselves. We're fighting, we're rigging elections. It's being fought at the level of big power politics. Here you can see this classic, another one of Paul Harris's classic cartoons, where here's President Xi with his abacus and Pompeo asserting they're fighting over what we should be protecting. So when President Granger and his team of lawyers who went to Texas twice are meeting with the Exxon folks, is anybody taking notes? I don't think so. No one on our side takes notes. We have already given it away. We are the level of the policeman who looks at the driver and says, you're not going to leave something for them by? I call it a festival of sharks. If you look at this area in our EEZ, who owns that property? This is a map of 2019 that shows the way it's been carved up in concessions, in prospecting license, granted to all these companies that are named for many years. And they are the ones who hire proper lawyers and who are negotiating as big boys. We are in the small boys category. Here's, Harris shows it. Pre-contract costs, Guyana pays them. Ring fencing, nope. Oil business, these sharks they have these contracts, they've written them. Harris has Guyana being kind of a little frightened fish. What about the Guyanese? We're probably the cackabelly, nowhere in sight. But we pay these costs in our destroyed environment, but also in the inflationary effects which are caused by when these companies can have any pre-contract cost for flying to Guyana, for example, and if let's say American Airlines, which they use, is going to charge $2,000 to get to Guyana, the other airlines will commensurately raise their fees. Guyanese pay. So we pay when our domestic economy is now matched to that of these behemoths. Festival of Sharks, these companies, CGX, Kaiju Block, all of them are flipping their property in the Guyana's EEZ without any mind about what a Guyana. They are earning these billions. What do we get? We get saddled with the pre-contract costs because we never read the contracts. Others wrote them and we said, where you want me to sign? And the president signs that blithely away. Look at these areas. Here is the Stabroek Block. Here is the other Kanji block, Kanji and Kaitshur. Exxon has, add the two together and you see the scale of propertied interests in the EEZ. So just Stabroek block, as I mentioned, or the track, 8 billion barrels. Venezuela has 3 billion barrels of oil equivalent, yes, But at the moment, Exxon is able to leverage its huge property in the Guyana, EEZ, to long in advance build its these floating production and oils FPSOs, ships that are really calling the shots in the EEZ. So Payara development, after the governments changed in August 2, there was a kind of every day in the paper, this huge call by Guyanese. So let's, halt. We don't have to proceed with licensing this Payara development. Let's do it in terms of what makes sense for Guyana. Does it happen? Nope. Exxon is able to, there's a kind of bringing a woman called Allison, I can't remember her name, Redford to Guyana as a kind of a fig leaf. But ExxonMobil proceeds with the Payara development on its terms. Domestic politics are, what will the crumbs mean for us? It means, of course, a continuation blithely of race-based politics in Guyana. Here is Minister Bharat, our little, hand lamp economy. That's the level at which we negotiate. So we learned in 2017 that the sovereignty that we talk about was paid for in secret, first by CGX and then by ExxonMobil. CGX, other countries, Brazil, Suriname, around us, all the other countries with petroleum reserves auction their they open an auction. So companies have to bid for the right to have a license. Does Guyana have an auction? Nope. A few people, I guess, meet in private from the highest level of the executive arm of government, and they sign these contracts written by the oil companies. So we learned only in 2017 that CGX had paid $10 million US, not to the Guyana exchequer. It never went through our books. It didn't pass through. It went directly to the lawyers who were adjudicating the case at the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. That's disclosed by the PPP in 2017 in this tit-for-tat way, after there was a talk about the 18 million, with Chris Ram revealed ExxonMobil had paid 18 million to APNU plus AFC, which they first denied and then said, oh, we needed it for the legal fees associated with a planned arbitration to counter Venezuelan aggression. By 2017, Venezuela was on its knees. It's hardly, the sum is ludicrous. Global Witness said conservatively, Guyana lost $55 billion through this one-sided contract signed by Minister Truckman. Who's in charge of our EEZ? ExxonMobil. Renegotiate? Why don't I just eat you and go home? That's the name of the game in Guyana's EEZ. I'm just going to quickly show some maps. Here is the HES map. You can see the activity that's going on in the exclusive economic zone. You can see also how cheap it is for these companies to break even. Phase 1, $35 a barrel break even. Phase 2, $25 a barrel. This is cheap for them, for Exxon, for HES, for all the other companies. This is a windfall. What will Guyana get? Some crumbs. Here is Tullow showing their offshore properties. This is another one, Frontera. Other companies are buying in at paying huge amounts to the holders of the license. Is Guyana earning anything? Not even 1% tax, nothing. So where are we? I thought this is another funny cartoon or a tragic cartoon from Paul Harris. We are the tributors here. That's the word used in our GGMC documents. We are the little bit of oil that's seeping out. We're probably collecting it for ourselves. big boys are managing the show. We say, no family or friends allowed, a big deal. As they say, Lehi try there with that. In other words, corruption and nepotism continue unabated. The former head of the EPA, who knows about oil, advised a review of ExxonMobil's 1999 production sharing agreement. He says Guyana was in a good place. Looking at the figures, 8 billion barrels of proven reserve just in the Stabroek block, as part of ExxonMobil, which has a total 24 billion proven reserve. Guyana had a strong card. What does Guyana do? In the first month of the new administration, EPA director sent on immediate leave. That's what we do. We shoot ourselves in the foot. I'm going to conclude now because I'm very depressed. I think I don't know if all Guyanese are, but I certainly am, because our population and our economy are still largely tied to what happens on the coastlands. This is the locus of our government and whatever economic power we have. And yet we pay so little attention to the vulnerability of the coast. We pay little attention to sea level rise and what the irreversible environmental impacts of this deep sea prospecting on the marine life. They have a right to be here, to share with whom we share the planet, and the pollution that we're already seeing from this oil industry that has set the terms of engagement. When I look at the reports from AOSIS and I look at the meetings, I see the small island states of the Caribbean, the English-speaking Caribbean, always engaged, always learning from AOSIS. Is Guyana there? Nope. Ramsar Convention, since I worked at Iwokrama from 2000, we were trying with the North Rupununi District Development Board, let's have a Ramsar site declared in Guyana. That was 2000. It's 2020, 20 years ago. Do we have a Ramsar site in Guyana for wetlands? No. We are busy fighting and killing each other at the level of black man versus coolie man. We do not even think of the precautionary principle to apply that in our environmental safeguards. This is a small quotation from Cole's book, and it says, if there is, I hope not, the destruction of our coast, it might not even register in the news media of the world. As he said, 10 days after the Deepwater Horizon exploded in 2010, a ruptured ExxonMobil pipeline dumped about 1 million gallons of oil in coastal areas of eastern Nigeria, soiling shorelines dotted by impoverished seaside villages. The affected areas lay far from American television news bureaus, and its kidnapping gangs made it a risky place to travel in any event. The spill barely registered. Fellow Guyanese, that can very well be our fate and the fate of the sharks and all the beautiful marine life that inhabit our shores. I started off by saying that in 2000, Venezuela, Suriname, their Navy ships hitched up the CGX semi-submersible and towed it away. Here is Paul Harris, my last slide. ExxonMobil is allowed to hitch up our entire EEZ and tow it away. Drill, baby, drill. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions. Or I would like a conversation, really, because I'm not at all any expert on this, just profoundly saddened by our failure to safeguard, our national failure to safeguard either Guyana's land sovereignty or marine sovereignty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janet, for that amazing presentation.